In this video, we're going to tell you everything you need to know for how to care for mourning geckos. So we're going to teach you everything you need to know for how to care for mourning geckos, and we're going to do it on our 5 topics. We're going to talk about the species, the setup, the heating and lighting, the breeding and the cost of mourning geckos. We're going to start off straight away, no rambling on. Number 1, the species. Now, understanding the species and where they come from is only going to help benefit your care and how you understand the care for mourning geckos. So there are species that come from the South Pacific right the way down to Hawaii. They do come in various different colours. They're just the different localities of the actual species. So the Hawaiian one tends to be a little bit lighter than the South Pacific ones. Now in the wild, they tend to live for sort of 7 to 10 years. That's what's been documented out in the wild. However, in captivity, they do tend to live a little bit longer, and that's because we can give them a much more stable environment. Out in the wild, they've got so many elements hitting them. Thunderstorms, rainstorms, tornadoes, hurricanes, you name it. They get that in the wild, whereas they don't get that in captivity. So they do tend to live a little bit longer in captivity. Ranging from 10 to 15 years is the going sort of age for a mourning gecko. Nearly 99% of all mourning geckos are actually female, and that's because they carry a genetic trait called parthenogenesis. What is parthenogenesis? Well, that's where they don't need a male to reproduce. They can reproduce exact direct clones, genetic clones of the mother. So there are some specifications to get them to breed, which will go on further through the video. They are primarily active during the hours of darkness. However, they can be seen in groups. They are big social groups going out hunting through the middle of the day as well. They are an arboreal species, so they do live up in the canopies, up in the trees. They are an omnivore species, so they do live off fruit flies, tree saps, anything like that. They absolutely love and they really adhere to. And in captivity, we can feed them anything from pinhead crickets to fruit flies to crested gecko diet. There's loads of options of what you can feed them in captivity, but again, we'll go on with that a little bit later. Now, they do slightly change colour. You hear of chameleons changing colour to match the background. They don't actually do that. They just fire up and fire down. What does that mean? When their mood changes, their colour changes slightly. So normally, they'll get a bit brighter, a bit more vibrant when they're a little bit upset and stuff like that. Their colour will change slightly. But let's move over to the setup. What is a mourning gecko setup actually look like? Well, there's 2 different ways you can go, and it all depends on how many mourning geckos you've got. If you've only got 1 or 2 mourning geckos, then a little jar enclosure like this is absolutely perfect. It's just a big 5-litre jar, big vented lid on the top. If you want to see how to make one of these, because it did cost me less than a £5, I'll leave a video just up there for you to check out, and that'll run you through exactly how to build this. You see him? We've got a little baby just there. We actually keep our babies in these because we do breed our mourning geckos. Let's move over to the setup and show you if you have more than that, or if you want to go extremely elaborate with your mourning gecko setup. There's all mine. You can see them all just there. That one is just a little spare one, just in case more eggs start hatching, because we do have a load of eggs just up there, because like I said, we do breed our mourning geckos. That one just there, that's our little jar setup. There's a couple of babies in there. But that is our proper big mourning gecko setup. Now that is a 45 deep, 45 centimetre wide, 60 centimetre tall Exoterra, which in hindsight is actually a little bit too big for the mourning geckos that I've got in here. I've only got 4 in there, and I hardly ever see them because they do hide so much. So I am on the lookout for a couple of more adults to quarantine and then add into this enclosure. Either that, or the babies that I've got over there are going to get grown up and added into that enclosure. The more that are in there, the more likely I am to actually see them. We've got all of our heating and lighting on the top, but inside is where it gets absolutely amazing. Now down that bottom corner, we've got a waterfall. The waterfall's actually not turned on because the mourning geckos have laid eggs in the waterfall. Fun fact, did you know that mourning gecko eggs are salt water tolerant? They can tolerate salt water racing over the top of them for well, as long as it needs to take for them to hatch. Now these ones had fresh water racing over them before I actually noticed the mourning geckos have actually laid eggs in there. So I don't know if they're going to be viable. I don't know if they're going to hatch, but I've left them there and I've turned the waterfall off just in case. If you want to see what happens to actually them, why not consider subscribing? We always put content out about mourning geckos because I'm just absolutely fascinated by them. But we don't just do mourning geckos. We've got specific species care, leopard geckos, bearded dragons, boa constrictors. We do everything reptile related on this YouTube channel. So if it's something you're interested in, make sure you do please consider subscribing. That sounds like I was begging for subscribers, but let's carry on. So we don't want to interrupt any of that. Fully bioactive. What does bioactive mean? Basically, it's fully live planted and natural to their natural habitat. It's a self-cleaning enclosure because down in the substrate we do have springtails and isopods that will eat the feces of these animals. Now you probably find you can't really see them, and that's because they're not out at the moment. Sometimes they like to hide in these little black cups. Sometimes they hide down the back corners. Sometimes they'll hide on the back of that plant. Normally there's one back there, but if you want to see one, there's normally one that hides below that waterfall, which isn't there now. Anyway, this is the setup. What's the setup all about? We have got a misting system. This is the Swell reptile misting system. There it is just there. We've also got a fog system, which I'll turn the fog system on just so you can see. We have it just down there, and it's just to flick the switch and boom. You can see the fog coming on. That adds to the humidity of the enclosure. You need a humidity of between 80 and 100% humidity. They feed our crested gecko diet. We've got it in that little tub just there. Now again, these are an arboreal species, so getting up to that is no problem to them. We've got plenty of vines and big leaved plants that they can hide under, big bromelia plants, loads of log work, and that's so they can easily climb around. If one of them is feeling a little under the weather, or the rest of them start to pick on it, it can run out the way and hide. So providing loads of cover and loads of shade is absolutely vital. If you want to see how we made that big Mourning Gecko setup, I did make a video where I went through step by step, taking it from an old second-hand bare Exoterra and turning it into this paradise for the Mourning Geckos. If you want to see that video, I'll leave a card just up there for you. So let's move over to the heating and lighting of this enclosure. We've got the Reptile Systems Black Edition dome light on the top of this enclosure. Inside that dome light, we've just got a 60-watt heat bulb from Reptile Systems. We have done a test in the past to see which is the most durable heat bulb. That one came out on top, so that's why I love to use that bulb with this setup. It's hooked up to a dimming thermostat, so it will keep that spot just there, right on the logs, at exactly 24 degrees Celsius, providing them a great heat. But not just that, the heat will then evaporate all the moisture that's inside the enclosure, providing an amazing humidity spike for the animals that are in there. Now when you've got both heat and moisture, it does evaporate the enclosure. We don't want the enclosure to dry out too much, so we use the Swell Reptile misting system. I highly recommend that because it is absolutely amazing and it's very, very cheap. Everyone thinks misting systems cost hundreds of pounds. This cost me £60. I'll link it down in the description down below for you guys to check out, but it's definitely worth looking into. Now there are a lot of people out there that say they don't need heat, they can live at room temperature. In this studio right now, the temperature fluctuates so much through the night to the day that I don't want a fluctuation too much, so I do actually have this on a thermostat, just an extra heat, just to keep it perfect all the time. I have all the lighting and all the heating set on timers, so it comes on for 12 hours a day and it's off for 12 hours a day. That gives them the daytime and nighttime routine that they would naturally have in the wild, giving them the best environment possible, because the wild is their best environment possible. If I can replicate the wild, it's only going to do them a lot better. For lighting purposes, UVB is the Ferguson Zone 2 Eco T5 unit by Reptile Systems. Now that's simply because if they want to go in the UV rays, they can bask on top of the leaves or on top of the logs or the vines. They can get closer if they want to. They can go and hide it underneath the speckled light underneath all the plants. There is so many options in there for them to portray a natural behaviour, which is exactly what I'm looking for in this enclosure. Now there's a lot of people out there that say they don't need UVB lighting. They can live perfectly fine without UVB lighting. It's different for me. I want to create a naturalistic environment just like they'd have in the wild. I want to see that grow just like it would normally grow in the wild. I want a piece of that slice of nature in my room just here, and that's what I've done. Giving these animals the UV lighting that they would naturally see in the wild is only going to benefit them massively. And plus, the UV lighting is highly important for their digestion and the way they absorb vitamins and minerals throughout their body. They produce their own vitamin D3 if they've got UV lighting. They absorb zinc a lot easier if they've got UV lighting. It's just so on and so on. There's so many benefits to actually having UV lighting for every animal that has access to it in the wild. If they have access to UV lighting in the wild, then they then have a defense against it if they need it built into them. So why wouldn't you do it? I provide them with UV lighting because it's going to benefit them. But on top of that, we've also got the Reptile Systems Pro 10 LED grow light on there. Now that's simply to allow the plants to grow. It's a set wavelength of light, and it just, so much technology has gone into that light to help plant growth and help the plants actually root into their enclosure. And it's done absolutely perfect in here. We've got wild plant growth, and it's all thanks to the Reptile Systems Pro 10 LED light. I'll link all the products that I'm mentioning throughout this entire video in the description down below if you wanted to go and check it out. Now let's get over to breeding mourning geckos, because it couldn't be any simpler, but there is a few things you do need to know to breed them. It would seem a lot of people want to get into mourning geckos solely for the breeding aspect. They think it's easy when it really isn't that easy. If you've been doing it for so long, it does become really easy, as you can tell just by all the eggs that I've gathered up over time. Let's go over to the mourning geckos and explain it a bit further for you. So yes, mourning geckos are parthenogenic, meaning they can breed without the need of a male. It doesn't mean breeding is easy for them. By far, it's totally the opposite. You need to make sure your setup is absolutely perfect. Both heating and humidity are the most important. If the setup is not perfect, your animals won't produce eggs. It's as quite simple as that. From my personal knowledge, as you can tell, I've got quite a few eggs, and I've bred so many of them in the past, in that enclosure just there and that one just there. You need to make sure, from my experience, if you buy one mourning gecko, they won't reproduce. And that's simply because, yes, they don't need a male, but they still need to do the courting activity that they do to spur on egg growth and egg laying. So to have two, you've got a really good possibility of them actually producing eggs. However, that's what's in the books. If you have two, they can reproduce. When I had two, they didn't reproduce. As soon as I added a third one in there, eggs started laying everywhere. So for my personal experience, and you can take it as personal experience, 3 mourning geckos in one little enclosure and you're going to start producing eggs. I had 3 in this little enclosure just here, perfectly fine. When they all got to adulthood and they all started laying eggs, there started to be a little bit of bickering. That is just a little Exotero Nano enclosure. It's not ideal for that many that are egg laying animals, so I upgraded to this one just here. So make sure your conditions are correct, you've got the correct amount of adult mourning geckos. Don't mix sizes with mourning geckos, because the adults can eat the babies. So I always like to get the eggs out of the enclosure. How do I do that? Well, I've got the 2 little cups up the top, and I'm aiming for them to lay their eggs inside those little cups so that they can be easily removed. However, mourning geckos are mourning geckos, and as you can tell by this video up here, they like to lay in random places that you can't get the eggs out of. For me, I've got them laid in the waterfall at the moment. That's what spurred me to add the correct heat to get the animals off the base further up into the enclosure to be able to lay their eggs up the top. Now let's move over to the cost of mourning geckos and how much they cost to start off with and how much they actually cost throughout their life. Right, this enclosure just here, I made a full video on how much that enclosure cost. Granted, there has been a few little additions and updates since that video, but that cost me, I think it was around about £170 to fully build that enclosure, and there's loads of money saving tips within the main video that I did pin earlier on. If you want to see the video on how much that actually cost, I'll leave it just up there for you right now, and we break it down into every little penny. The mourning geckos themselves, they cost me £10 each. To start with, I bought 3, I grew them up and they laid eggs, then I grew up the babies. So I've now got 4 in this one just here, and I've got 2 babies in this one just here. I've got 5 eggs in this one just here, and I've got 6 eggs in this one just here. So they are producing and it is working perfectly fine for me. But once you start off with that first initial 3, you're going to have a lifelong supply of fresh mourning geckos to continue breeding. These little setups just here, they cost me less than £5. Top tip, going to your old school sweet shops. So if you've got any jars lying around, bang. Like I said, they're dead easy to make. The food that you can feed to your mourning geckos are fruit flies and crested gecko diet. I prefer the Pangea because they just seem to like it more often, but they go absolutely crazy when I start adding fruit flies into that enclosure. You can culture your own fruit flies, which is what I do, and I always have a wide variety of all different sorts of crested gecko diets. I mean, £8.75 for a Pangea, and that lasts my mourning geckos, oh god, best part of about a month. So to keep mourning geckos happy and healthy, it really doesn't cost that much, and you can make your money back by selling off the babies if you have too many babies. You can mix it up a bit with all the different various flavours of Pangea and Rapashi. Just your standard crested gecko diet will do these guys absolutely perfect. If you are adding ultraviolet light into this enclosure, your UVB lighting like I have here, don't add any food that's got extra calcium with D3 in it. With UVB lighted, they produce their own vitamin D3 within their body, so they don't need added D3. Just have a read of the back of your packets and just see what's in there. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you've learned something. If you have, make sure you hit the thumbs up button and leave me a comment down in the description down below.